local libraries. Oh, I wanted to let everybody know too that we are recording this for posterity for others who may not be able to make the meeting. So if you're uncomfortable, you can turn off your video or you can leave, but you have to consent. So please do consent or leave or do whatever you need to do to make yourself feel comfortable. We'd like to be able to share this with as many people as possible. Lori, is everything good on that end? Are we able to record? Because I had to consent. So
good.
So here is where you can download the presentation in its long format as a PDF around timing the tides. Here is where you can watch a long format presentation of what we're doing today. And then also I would advise going to this section of our website called Paddling under the Get Outdoors section. And here there's this accordion part of this page that has further resources. One is a free download you can get for the canoe and kayak guide that has some different itineraries. Again, the same presentation that was on that other page. And here's a link to the Boston Tide. And then we are a nonprofit, and our purpose is to protect our waters. So we work throughout the South Shore to provide education and outdoor engagement, programming to help our communities to protect our waters for all of us, including other species. And so we are definitely an environmental nonprofit, and we love our water. We love to get out and enjoy it. And by joining as a member, you're helping us to do that important work. And at the same time, you get this incredibly cool recreational guide map. That is another resource for getting outside in the area, has many locations. In addition to that, you can just go to the paddling section of our website and select a town or look at the map view here, and this provides you with locations for getting out and paddling throughout the region. So this is beyond not just the north and south, but it also includes the launch areas on the north and south rivers. And it provides you either a list view or a map view, and you can scroll through and look at some locations that you might want to get out and enjoy, and it'll provide you with all the needed information that you might need to access different parts of the both the rivers and, as I mentioned, other water bodies on the South Shore. We wanted to make it as comprehensive as possible. This is just an example of what you'll see there. So this provides you Ludham's Ford Park, tells you where it is. You can paddle up there on the pond behind the dam. So please feel free to explore that. And then we really do want to have this be about questions and answers, but we do have Charlie who's going to give approximately like a 5 to 10 minute presentation overview of the tides, how to calculate the tides and their delays. And then we'll have a little Q&A moment. And when you have questions, because there's so many of us, if you could please use the chat function to type in your question or just say, I have a question. And Lori Wolf, who is our moderator today, will recognize you in order so that we can take your questions in a organized fashion. And hopefully that, that will help you. I do just want to make a plug to join us on our Great River Race this year. Typically, of course, we would have had it on one day. It was planned for August 1st, in fact. But this year, we are going to be doing it because of the pandemic. We are doing it virtually. And I'll just go to the events section and show you that. The virtual Great River Race this year is the entire month of August. And it allows, you can either do a short route this year. We have two different routes. One goes to Couch Beach from the Marshfield Canoe Launch, or you can go all the way up and do the traditional almost 7-mile route, which is to the Old Washington Street Bridge, and then the takeout is up at the up at the Indian Head River Takeout. And I'll give a plug for, if you do this, you really are helping us to with our mission, and you're really helping us if you become a fundraiser. A fundraiser enables you to be a fundraiser. You can click here, and that enables you to get access to materials to ask others to support our cause. The requirement is to raise $150, not too big, and it enables you not to have to pay the $50 registration fee. So, and you get some cool swag with that. We have NSRWA buffs. This is my son wearing his. And the first 25 get this neat waterproof protector for your phone. And the way that the race works is that you do it on your own. We send you all of the dates and the tides that will work for those 2 routes. And you can do it on your own or with friends. And anytime throughout the month of August, there's like quite 20-something days available to do it on. So that's kind of nice. And you use your phone to monitor your time on a fitness app, and then you send us that. And then we will keep a leaderboard on our website so people can compare and be competitive with each other. You also get free ice cream, which I think is probably the best part. So please can think about supporting our cause and being a fundraiser and paddling this year with us. We really need your help to continue our work to protect our waters, and I hope you'll consider doing that. We will be hosting another webinar or Zoom meeting. I think it's the 30th of July. Yeah. Similar to this, but just particularly about the Great River Race. And that actually might be an opportunity for people to find partners to do the race with if you'd like to buddy up with somebody else, if you don't have a friend that you can do it with. So hopefully we'll see you out there on the rivers, and hopefully you'll think about joining us. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and ask Charlie to share his screen, and he is going to do an overview on the tides and how to calculate them, and some itineraries that you might consider. And again, there'll be some opportunities for questions. So if you've got questions, you can start putting them in the chat. And then when we get to the blank slide, we can kind of field some of those questions with Lori.
Okay, thank you, Sam.
Thank
so
you.
I only have a few slides, and I'll go through them in, I think, enough detail. And I'll start with basics. And just as a reminder, this screen speaks to things that you learned in the 3rd grade. So tide cycles. There are 2 highs, they're known as floods, and 2 lows, known as ebbs, about every 25 hours. Really, it's every lunar day, 24.8 hours to be exact. Like tides occur about 12.5 hours apart. So between 2 highs or between 2 lows, there is about 12.5 hours. Opposite tides occur a little over 6 hours apart. So between a high and a low, or a low and a high. And the vertical rise and fall of the tide creates horizontal movement in the water, which is known as currents. And tidal currents are most noticeable where water may be restricted through a natural man-made object, like a bridge, or where the river narrows down. The current may be a little bit more aggressive, and it might be more noticeable in varying depths of water. This is a tide chart, which I have on my phone, and it just shows a visual of what the tide might look like. So the blue spikes are the incoming flooding tides, the green troughs are the outgoing or ebbing tide. And the left scale represents the height of the tide, and the bottom scale represents the time. So it's the vertical movement of water. And I placed black circles where the water is known to be slack, where there is little or no movement of the water between a high and a low. So when the high cycle ends and before the low or ebbing cycle begins, there is virtually no movement of the water, and that's known as slack water or slack tide. And here's that same chart, and here I've placed a couple of asterisks which represent typically where the current relating to the tide is most aggressive. So it's just before the end of the cycle and before the beginning of the next part of the cycle. And the reason for that is because basically the volume of water diminishes to the point before a low or an ebbing tide ends and a flooding tide begins. And that's where you'll find on a tide chart the most aggressive current as a result of the tide cycle. So a good rule of thumb to follow in any tidal rivers, and we're going to talk about the North and South rivers specifically, always time your paddle to run upriver on an incoming tide and downriver on an outgoing tide. Now, of course, there's a lot of timing to determine or calculate when you're thinking about this. So you can join at any point in an incoming tide. Just remember to head upriver. You'll just do less paddling or less aggressive paddling. Doesn't mean you can't paddle against the current or against the tide. It just means that it might be a little bit more enjoyable if you paddle with the current or with the tide. This is a typical tide chart. Sam pointed out earlier that there is a link on the website for the Boston tide chart, and I suggest you use that. I've taken a typical tide chart and I've applied color to it to separate sections. So the green, light green column is the day of the month. The pink columns represent high tide information or flooding tide, and the blue columns represent low tide or the ebbing tide. So here, for example, on May 1st, the time of high tide at a particular location, the location being Boston, was at 10:03 a.m. And the height of that tide was just about 8¼ feet. And that's only meaningful to know the height of the tide if you're in very shallow waters or if you're really in tidal areas or near coastal areas with a deep draft vessel. It's really not significant if you're in a kayak or a canoe, but tide charts do give that information. And if we jump over to the blue set of columns, you can see for May 1st, the low tide was at 4:05 a.m. and it charted at 1.2 feet. And what that means, that is the measure in feet from the charted depth of the water. Whatever the charted depth of the water is on this particular low tide, we'd add a little over a foot to it to give you the depth of the water. And if you look way down at the bottom of this chart for May 7th, go over to the blue columns, you can see that the low tide was at 8:21 a.m. on May 7th, and it shows a negative about 1/2 foot. And that means you subtract 6 inches from whatever the charted depth is, in this example, for Boston Harbor. Not significant if you're in the harbor, only significant if you're using the Boston chart to canoe or paddle, for example, into the Neponset River. So we use the Boston tide chart as a point of reference. And this is a good slide. This is also, it's either on the website or it will be on the website. that gives the time difference from key points in the North, South, and Herring Rivers. Now, I'm sure everyone is familiar with the spit out at the end of the North River between 3rd and 4th Cliff, if you know the geography. The spit time for high tide is the same as the Boston tides. So going upriver from the spit or the entrance into the North River or the Herring River, you get to Damon's Point, you have to add about 20 minutes to whatever the time for the tide was for Boston. Further upstream, up at the 3A bridge where Rote Marine is located, you add about a half hour. All the way up to the Union or Bridge Street Bridge in Marshfield or Norwell, add about an hour and a half. Further upstream to Couch Beach, add about 2 hours, and continuing all the way up to the Route 3 bridge, add about 2.5 hours, and all the way up to the Hanover Canoe Launch, what is affectionately known as the crotch in the river, you add about 3.5 hours. So high tide at the spit would occur 3.5 hours later, all the way up at the Hanover Canoe Launch. In the South River, Wrexham Beach, you add about an hour to the Boston tide. And for the new launch behind the CVS in Marshfield on Route 139 in Marshfield Center, again, you add about 3.5 hours to get the local time for that location. And on the Herring River, you can paddle from the spit up to Driftway Park, which is a place that you can put in. There's parking there. For that, you add about a half hour. And I've put an asterisk on a few of these locations to indicate that they are also a launch site. And this information, as I said, is in the website. So the next 2 slides I have, Sam, are the launch locations, describing them, and then the map that shows where they are. So I'll just go to those. You want to talk about those?
Yeah, I think so. Let's keep going. And Lori, then after he gets through this, we can see if there's field some questions.
Okay, so in the North River, these boat ramps are open to all. So Driftway, which is really up in the Herring River, what I mentioned earlier. Then the Marshfield Canoe Launch is down at Union Street. Now this bridge, what is commonly known as the Union Street Bridge, the street that approaches the bridge from Marshfield is Union Street. The street that approaches the bridge from Norwell is Bridge Street. So on the Marshfield side of the bridge, just before the bridge, is the Marshfield Canoe Launch. Up in Pembroke, at the Brick Kiln Road off of 139 is a launch. Not a large area, but you can get in there and park and put in at that location. And then all the way up in Hanover at the boat launch up by the Indian Head, where I refer to this as the crotch on the North River. And on the South River, Wrexham Beach, you do have to pay if you don't have a Marshfield sticker during the summer months. And you drive into their parking lot and you walk with your kayak through the dunes, easy walk, to launch into the South River. And then all the way up behind the CVS on Route 139 in Marshfield Center. You can park at the Levitate shop, which is on 139 across the street from the CVS after you drop off your kayak at the bridge. And here's a map that shows the North, South, and Herring Rivers as you enter from the new inlet from Mass Bay between 3rd and 4th Cliff. And the red stars are those launches. So the first red star, which is this one right here, is at the Marshfield Canoe Launch just before the Union Street Bridge, Pembroke, all the way up on 139. You work your way in off of 139. And then all the way up at the Hanover Boat Launch, there's another public put in. And this is the one that's 3.5 hours upstream from the time of the tide out here at the Spit. And in the South River is Wrexham Beach. And this is the CVS launch behind the CVS on Route 139. And this one is about 3.5 hours upstream on the South River. So if you have any questions later, I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you.
I think that's a good map to keep up, Charlie.
Okay.
Maybe for a little bit while people are formulating their questions. I'm just going to chime in a little bit about, so the Driftway boat ramp is also open to all, and that's up on the Herring River at the sort of top of the screen. That one you can put in and go out to the Spit to the area that a lot of people like to go to the beach. I would just, again, be very cautious about that area of the mouth of the river where the two rivers meet and go into the ocean. We don't recommend anybody go paddling, in that mouth area, as it is very dangerous. People have, actually lost their lives there, usually during storm events, but, there's just a lot of current to try to navigate, even in a boat with a motor. But you're perfectly safe to stay behind the Spit, with a paddling boat. So, and if you are, a good kayaker and the weather's good and everything's calm, you might be able to cross the mouth and go into the South River. But we don't recommend it for people unless they're experts. And I would also say for the CVS South River launch, you can park at the CVS. There's like 5 designated parking spots there. So, and you do have to portage your boat a little bit there too. So just to be mindful of that, you might have to take your boat and walk about 1/10 of a mile. So that's just something to consider. So, Lori, if you want to field some of those questions or recognize people.
Sure. We have a question from Mary. She says, I'm new to kayaking. Do you have a recommendation for where to start out? Also, do any of these locations offer rentals?
So I guess I'll think about this one. See if I can field this one. So a recommendation for where to start out. I think you should come with us on one of our public paddles, just so that you get a sense of it. That would be one recommendation. I would also say if you've just bought a kayak and you need a lesson, that Billington Sea down in Plymouth offers lessons, and that would be another confidence builder for you. I think a nice paddle is an easy paddle to do is Marshfield Canoe Launch to Couch Beach. And if you do the Great River Race, you get the tides for August, and you can do that. And maybe if you want, you could find a buddy with somebody who's going to do the race. So that might be a way to do it. And then in terms of locations that offer rentals, the King's Landing Marina offers kayaks and canoes, or did, for rent, and they are in Norwell on 123. And it's an honor system. You're going to go there and you put your money in a bucket kind of thing, and you can grab a boat, but there's no reservation and such. So it's catch as catch can as to whether or not there'll be a boat there. And so, and I know during the beginning of the season, I was told by some people that the boats were like under a dock or something. So I don't know if they're available right now. So best to call maybe and find out. But that's King's Landing, and that's on our website. You can find that in all of those outdoor listing sites. So hopefully that helps.
Now, Jeannie has
Lori,
yeah.
Lori, you can read the question, or you can ask the person to unmute so they can ask it themselves.
Okay. Jeannie Rooney, do you want to unmute?
I'd be happy to. Can you hear me?
Sure. Yep.
Hi, so I'm trying to plan a paddle, and we were thinking that I actually have a book from the AMC that it says that, that's like the distance from the Hanover Boat Launch to the Couch Beach is about 5 miles. But we were thinking of maybe doing the Pembroke Canoe Launch to Couch Beach and then back. But I wanted to get a sense for, number one, how many miles it is, and also how do we figure out, like, because I did it one time before with the group, when to time it so that we're at Couch when it's slack tide, so that, with, like maybe have lunch there and then turn around and go back. So.
The best thing to do is use the Boston tide chart. And I'll just go back to this screen. So here you can see Couch Beach. You have to add 2 hours to the Boston tide chart.
Mhm.
And if you follow the screen up at the Hanover Canoe Launch is 3.5 hours. So depending on where you want to put in, if you put in Pembroke, just estimate that it's somewhere between 2 and 3 hours difference to the Boston tide. And whatever the tide cycle tells you high or low, and halfway between would be Boston slack. So again, just do the arithmetic. It's pretty simple. In fact, I have a couple of slides I can go to show you an example of how to actually do the calculation.
I think that would be helpful.
If you want me to do that, I can do that right now.
That would be
Yeah,
great.
that's,
And does anybody know how many miles it is from Pembroke to Couch?
well,
I can, go ahead, Sam.
if I looked at the, I could probably estimate it for you because I know how many miles it is from the Marshfield Canoe Launch to Couch Beach. It's 2.66 miles from the Marshfield Canoe Launch to Couch. And then if I looked at the map, I could probably estimate to Pembroke.
Okay.
If you go all the way up to Old Washington from Marshfield Canoe Launch, it's just under 7 miles. So I'd have to kind of look at the map again to see, but I'm guessing maybe 4 or 5 miles.
It's about 5 miles from Hanover to Couch, because I have an AMC book that listed that.
Yeah. So you're probably sort of take off. I bet it's 3 or 4 miles,
Okay.
3 to 3.5. You can measure on a Google map. There is a little measuring stick that you can to measure the actual meanders in the river.
Okay. Thank you.
You can do it on Google Earth too. So here's an example, Marshfield Canoe Launch to Couch.
Yeah.
Spend about 3 hours exploring or having lunch at Couch and then return back to the canoe launch. So I started with the Boston tide chart. I just picked a random day here and found a high tide at 11:20. So for the Marshfield Canoe Launch, I'm going to add 90 minutes to the Boston tide time. So the local time would be 12:50 for the high. And the Couch Beach tides, I'd add 2 hours. The local time would be 1:20 p.m. for the high. So the plan would be leave the canoe launch at 11 a.m. I just picked a working hour,
Yeah.
11 a.m. on the incoming tide, paddle on to Couch, get there at about 12:30, a leisurely paddle, spend 3 hours at Couch, make sure you secure your kayak because the changing tide and the current might take it away, and leave Couch at 3:30 on the outgoing tide, and you're back at the launch by 5 p.m. All
Perfect.
works within a reasonable time. And these are on the website. These examples are on the website. There are 5 or 6 of them,
Oh, okay.
just to give you an idea of how to do the calculation, okay?
Thank you. Thank
Okay,
you.
Jeannie.
So Anna Hughes has a question, if you'd like to unmute yourself.
Sure. Thank you. I'm new to the area and I paddleboard rather than kayak more often. I was just wondering if you had any advice for that for the rivers and if it, the same sort of guidelines apply as for kayaking.
How good are you?
I'm pretty good.
Okay. Okay.
I stay up if that helps.
Okay.
I don't fall in very often.
Here's one caution I have for you. Is it Anna?
Yes, it's Anna.
Okay. If you do find yourself near the Union Street Bridge on a paddleboard, be very, very careful because on a high tide, there may only be 4 or 5 feet of clearance between the bridge superstructure and the water surface. And I'm
Gotcha.
assuming you're taller than 4 or 5 feet. So,
I am, though I could sit down.
okay. Well, be very careful in that area. The only other thing I would be concerned about if you were paddling upriver beyond the Union Street Bridge, as you come around and the river turns left, I'll put where the Marshfield Canoe Launch is, where the river turns left going upstream. That area is known as Rocky Reach before and after the turn. And if you're on a very low tide, you may be very close to some of the rocks in the seabed, in the riverbed. Just be careful there.
Okay. Is it better to go during a high tide?
Well, it depends on whether you're going to go by the bridge. Be very careful.
A note about that bridge, right? That bridge, the bridge, besides having low clearance at high tide, also
even
pinches
at a half tide.
I'll be sure to duck.
Okay.
Yeah. It can pinch the river and make the velocity through any of the bridges is something to just be aware of.
Sure.
Particularly the Union and the old Washington Street bridges. You won't be able to paddle against a tide going under those bridges because the velocity will be too high.
Okay.
And and then for people who aren't familiar, if you're going through a bridge on a canoe or even a paddleboard and you're going with the current, you want to shoot right down the middle and keep your vessel straight. What you don't want to do is have your boat. You don't want to have your boat turn perpendicular to the current under the bridge, and then you flip, which, because you have your PFD on.
Yes, I do.
So fine, because you're wearing your life jacket, you will not die, but it's just and hopefully your dog can go on a paddleboard with you. My dog goes on my paddleboard with me. So I'm a big fan of paddleboarding. I love doing it. I think you should do it on the rivers. It's so much fun because you could just jump off your board and get wet when you want.
Anna, one more thing.
That's one of my favorite things about it too. Thank you. Sorry about the dog there for a sec.
One more caution. When you're paddling near the Union Street Bridge, anything above a half tide all the way up to a full tide in that area, there are oftentimes kids jumping off the bridge into the river. And what you don't want to do is have a kid land on your paddleboard. So just be aware of what's going on there.
Yeah.
Okay,
That's for everybody.
we have another question from James Phillips.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yep.
Wonderful. I can't tell on my camera here. So when paddling in the Pamet River on Cape Cod, we noticed the most incredible sight in the world is when the tide is coming out and the animals are suddenly coming out into the ground, into the dry areas. And it's absolutely spectacular. And I wonder if any of our rivers demonstrate that the way that does up the Pamet.
I've seen lots of bird life along the rivers in the marsh grass. I have seen seals sunning on the marsh, on the rivers. I haven't seen anything else. Sam?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with you. Those tide flats are rich in resources and food for wading birds, and that definitely, particularly in the fall and spring migration periods, you're going to see a lot of unusual birds that are flying from, South America and in the Antarctic and whatnot. So that those areas down closer towards the spit, you're going to see a lot more tidal flats exposed. So the closer you get to the ocean, you'll see much more sort of exposed tide flats. The other place that I would say is really cool is, and really mostly unique, and frankly, one of my favorite places to go is the Crotch. We lovingly refer to it as the Crotch, which is the headwaters of the North River at the Hanover boat launch, where the Herring Brook from Pembroke meets the Indian Head River and combines to form the headwaters of the North River. It's still tidally influenced up there, but it's freshwater, and it's absolutely stunning. Particularly at this time of year, you're going to see cardinal flower. Wild rice is starting to be visible. All sorts of bird life turtles, and special place because it's a tidal freshwater marsh, highly unique in the coastline because of most of our rivers have been dammed. I think there's only 3 freshwater tidal in Massachusetts left. So please go see that. And it's the tide isn't as strong up there because you're 12 miles from the ocean. So it's a little bit easier to deal with the tide issue. You don't have to care as much.
We were up there last week, and I had in my pocket a salinity monitor, which I was putting in the water in different places. And by the time I got up there, it was good enough to drink. So it had changed beautifully right where it should. We still didn't find the small animals, though, that we had seen on the Pamet. By small animals, I mean little tiny crabs, little tiny other animals, some of which I don't know, but others do, that are suddenly coming out. And if you can find that at the right timing, I just wondered if any of our rivers actually show that. I've only seen it in the Pamet. I don't think anywhere else. And that's the half of the Pamet that goes to the ocean, not the upper half on the other side of Route 6.
So the Cape is actually a demarcation of an ecoregion. And so I think those crabs that you're talking about, they kind of go, I think they're fiddler crabs. They're moving their way up because of climate change, but they are particular to the south side of the Cape and the Cape. So you probably saw those guys coming out of their holes. But definitely crabs will be seen at low tide, particularly around the spit. We take kids there to do tide pooling. That's a really nice place to go tide pooling at low tide, and is the back of Wrexham Beach. Those are good places to go visit during low tide. Cool.
Great, thank you. We had one experience at the spit where we actually had a kayak surfing course, which is the only way you can kayak out there is if you're planning on surfing those waves.
Yeah, well, definitely stay behind the spit. I don't think you don't need to surf the waves if you're behind the spit, but you can park your boat and then walk over the dunes to the tide line. So.
Okay. Michael Marlowe has a question.
Is Mike available? Mike, can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, I'm here.
Go ahead, Mike. And I read your question and I wasn't quite sure when you say how much time, are you talking about tide or are you talking about, what are you?
No, the duration of it on a casual paddle.
Okay. I just did this for the Grand River Race and I'm no racer. And we put in at the Marshfield Canoe Launch and we went all the way up to the Hanover boat launch. And I was filming, and so I had to stop and fiddle around with my camera, and I had a GoPro and all sorts of stuff. So we were able to do it without a lot of heavy lifting exercise in 2 hours.
Oh, okay. Shorter than I thought.
If you can, like anything, you can linger longer, right?
Sure.
I have done that with a group and me stopping along the way to comment on the historical shipyards or to take a swim at Couch's Beach, or, it can be a 4-hour sojourn. So it's totally up to you. You don't want to go much longer than that, though, because the tide will turn on you.
Correct.
So that's just something to note before you get in your canoe or kayak. Okay, I know what the tide is where I'm getting in, but do I know what the tide will be when I'm getting out? And the best thing to do is just to calculate when the tide is going to turn, where you're going to get out, so you know better, right? Okay, I have to get out by a certain time. And you should be able to moderate your paddle time to make it. Does that make sense?
We refer
It
to
does.
that, we refer to that as local time. So knowing what the Boston tide as the base is, and going back to the calculation in minutes or hours, determine what the tide is locally. And the location would be, in your example, from the Union Street Bridge, we would add an hour and a half, and going all the way up to the Hanover Canoe Launch would be 3.5 hours. So the local tide would be 3.5 hours after whatever the Boston time is up at Hanover Canoe Launch.
Mm-hmm. Right. So I actually just did this math for somebody. If you wanted to go from Hanover down to Marshfield, to say the tide was high at noon, Boston means it's high up at the Hanover launch at 3:30. Want to go on an outgoing tide, so you can come downstream. You'd have to stage your car. Remember that part, because you have no way to get back out. But so in that case, if the high tide was noon, it's 3:30 high tide locally up at Hanover, and you're going to take the ride downstream as the tide's outgoing, and you just want to be able to get out before the tide turns. You just do that math. Does that make sense? Okay.
Okay, we have a question from Shannon Micus.
Shannon, are you there? Anybody? Is Shannon still part of us?
I can read the question. Do you have an estimated duration for recommended paddles on the website so we can plan a trip?
Somebody's got,
Laurie, I think some of these examples are on the website from the presentation.
Okay.
But I can send you my example slides and the tide chart if you wanted to set that up on the website.
yeah, I think it's in the presentation, but somebody
Yeah, I'm
somebody
trying.
mute somebody with a background noise right now that's hard to talk over. Okay, that sounds better now.
I
Thank you.
think I got it.
All right. These Zoom meetings are fun. Do you have an estimated duration for your recommended paddles on the website? So that's what you were referring to, Charlie?
Yes.
Yeah. Again, as I said, the longest paddle, it's not the longest, but it could be a long paddle. It's really the Great River Race paddle, which is from the canoe launch up to Marshfield canoe launch up to Hanover. And I did that in just 2.5 hours the other day with, really not pushing myself. Again, you can take your time. It all depends on how vigorous you want to paddle or can paddle. And I think the question becomes, when does the tide turn at your destination, so that you can have a better sense? And then you could time yourself a little bit to say, okay, well, it took me, I used my fitness app, and that was kind of cool because it gave me a mile per hour, right? I could tell, okay, I just did a mile and I did it in 15 minutes. Now I know that the rest of the route is another 4 miles, and it's going to take me an hour and a half to do it at this rate. So am I going to make it before the tide turns? And you do the math about what the tide is going to turn at your destination.
So another question just came in. Do you have a specific app for tides that you would recommend?
I use the there are several. I keep Tides Near Me, Tides Near Me on my iPhone. But you can go to the website and download an app from Boston Tide Chart. Just do a search for Boston Tide Chart. But the one that I tend to use most is called Tides Near Me. There's another one that gives a lot of information on tide and current that's called Tides for the number 4 Fishing. Also an app that you can download either Android or iPhone. I like Tides Near Me. And you can search for a location.
I'm
Mary,
going to feed a few of these questions, Lori, because it's getting on in time and I see people trying to get off, but I think I can field a few of these questions. So to Shannon's question, I do believe actually the Canoe and Kayak Guide has estimated durations, and that's in that paddle resources online on our website. Go to paddling and then look at the accordion and undo the first accordion, and there's a download of the Canoe and Kayak Guide. I think that should provide you estimated duration. Again, it's very much dependent upon your time rate of paddling. And then in terms of us having trips, guided paddles, we're really just kind of getting our feet under us a little bit. We are actually doing a series of paddles out at World's End with the trustees that I think we could direct people to after this. And then Brian, who is our outdoor educator, he will be putting together some paddles. We'd like to do, we'll be doing some in August and in September, but we really have to just be getting our feet under us after kind of being closed. So please do stay tuned to our emails to hopefully join us on a paddle. Daniel Edwards had a question about water rise in the rivers relative to the tides. Daniel, not quite sure what your question is about that. You know, it does mediate slightly as you go upriver. In other words, you're not going to see an 8-foot tide up at the crotch. But I don't know the exact answer to how high the tide might move the water. Do you, Charlie? It's really like 3 feet up there, I think.
Yeah, it does diminish as you go further upstream.
Yeah.
But I don't know what the,
with that
I don't know
12
what the
mile.
measure is.
Yeah. Yeah, every tide would be different depending on,
Yeah,
there's
sure.
a lot, because the fresh water coming out of the rivers will make a difference, as well as
And just the force of the tide.
yeah. But to be sure, it diminishes as you go upstream, and up at the crotch, I would say the tide variation level there is like 3 to 4 feet, whereas downstream it's going to be like 10 to 11 based on 8 to 11.
Time of the
So-
tide is certainly more critical than depth of the tide upriver.
Mm-hmm. And so do we have any guided trips for or including stand-up paddleboards? No, but I think that's a great idea. Maybe I'll run one because I like to paddleboard. I will say it is a category for our Great River Race, and that might be a nice way to meet up with some people. As I said, we're going to host another meeting on the 30th to go over the Great River Race and bring the people together who have registered to date and who are participating, and that might be a way to find a buddy to do it with. In terms of a fitness app, I've just discovered Strava, but I also, before that, I've used Map My Fitness. Both of those apps have geolocators and will map your route so that you can identify how long you've been on the water in terms of distance and time, and that way you can get a rate of paddle and then identify how long it might take you. And then for Paula, who asked us why to use the Boston Tide Chart versus the North River Tide Chart, I just find it easier to do the math. It's just a reference, but you certainly could adjust. You'd have to take 20 minutes. If you use the North River Tide Chart, you're using Damon's Point, which is 20 minutes offset from Boston. So you'd have to deduct 20 minutes from every other station. Does that make sense to Paula and others?
Yes.
Yeah. Am I right on that, Charlie? That's right. Yeah.
Yep, correct.
It's just because,
And that's the only published tide location on the rivers is Damon's Point.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
There are no other published tide locations on the rivers. And the
Yeah.
Spit, which is not a published tide location, is simply the same as Boston.
Oh, okay, great, thank you.
yeah, Damon's Point is just slightly upstream, so it's the 20-minute mark. So you just, again, and just to be clear, all of these are estimates. The tide changes in its force. We have fresh water coming out of the rivers, which is part of the beautiful dynamic environment that you're in. But, you know, it can be off by 20 minutes, half an hour, depending on those conditions. So just use that, you know, as your guide. You know, I think of paddling on the North River, paddling anywhere, the same way I think about sailing. It's about the journey, not the destination. Right? Because you may be out there for things happen and you may end up being out there for a little while. Accept it, go with the flow.
Bring water.
Bring water, yes. And just a few ideas about safety. I just want to comment, Charlie, maybe you have a safety slide. I've already mentioned don't paddle at the mouth. I've already mentioned the biggest thing you can do to protect you and your family in the water is to wear a life jacket, have it properly sized and zipped up. It will not work if it's falling off of you. You just don't know what can happen, so you really want to do that. Most of the deaths at sea are because people were found without a life jacket on. They drowned, and that's sad, and it's so preventable. So please get yourself a life jacket.
Is this screen showing?
It is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just one point on Sam's comment, proper size. Don't put a little kid in an adult PFD. They'll fall right out of it.
Mhm.
And very small children, PFDs, have a crotch strap which keeps them in it. So these are a list of things that you know, you may want to consider. And I do stress, bring water, stay hydrated.
Mhm. And the rest, I think, is fairly self-explanatory. I always let people know where I'm going if I'm going to go out on the water, and just somebody on land, I let them know when I expect to return. And I usually have a communication device, whether it be a radio, VHF, or a phone. You want a dry bag so you can keep things dry if you do tip in the water. You don't want your phone to get, and that's if you become a Great River Race fundraiser, you get the little waterproof thing for your phone. So that's kind of another, hopefully, incentive to get you out on the water with us in August. I love Billington Sea Kayak. I think they're really great, and they do give great lessons. So if you flip your kayak, they show you how to get in and out of your kayak safely. And again, we will be hopefully doing some public paddles on weekends and throughout August and September. Hopefully we're going to have a nice fall this year for people to continue to stay out and stay safe. I'll just put a little plug in for for if you're not a paddler, we also have a pontoon boat. We're having it sort of renovated right now, and it will be hopefully on the water in August. And again, another nice way to experience the river with people who may not be as excited about getting in a kayak or a paddleboard. And that way you can hear more about the history and nature of these resources. And if you're not a member, I'll just give another plug for that. Membership is $50 for a family, $35 for an individual. It's a deductible, tax deductible nonprofit donation. And thank you for doing that. You get this wonderful guide map that has lots of information, has all the title offsets, all in one place. Now we have a lot of it on our website, but you have to kind of jump back and forth, whereas this, you can look all in one place in a piece of paper and have that. Some people actually laminate this and bring it out on the river with them. So they can do that. And so we'd love for you to become members and be part of the community that cares not only about these resources, but all of our water resources here on the South Shore. We have over 1,900 members. We're one of the largest environmental advocacy groups in our state, and you could join us and join your voice with ours and make sure that our resources are saved for us and for our future generations. That's my plug. And it's just about 1, so I think hopefully everybody got everything that they need. And if I see, I'm just seeing, looking, Paula asked, what's the difference in tide from Spit to South River? Well, that's a good question. So the Wrexham Beach is another what? What's the Wrexham Beach delay? 40 minutes?
No, it's
Boston? 20? Where's the tide?
About a
chart
half hour.
there?
I'm sorry, about an hour.
About a half hour?
About an hour.
An hour, okay. So it's an hour at Wrexham, delayed from Boston, which is the same as the Spit. But again, just be super cautious, forewarned about that mouth. So if you're living on Hummerock and you want to go down the South River to the Spit, I would be really careful about that. It's just, it's dangerous water. It's not impossible. It's just, it's not for the faint of heart. You can actually, at high tide, navigate through some of the creeks in the marsh. Some of my friends have done that to avoid being near the mouth, and then kind of come out. So you can look at a map and see what I'm talking about and try to thread the needle, but you have to do it at high tide, and you might have to get out and portage somewhere. That would be a way to do it safely if you're concerned, because it's not just this, not just with the mouth of the river. Right now, as you come in behind Fourth Cliff in the South River, that's got, and if you've ever tried to go through there, even in a current is quite strong. So it's a very dynamic sand system. So every year it's a little different. Are there examples for South River paddles? I don't know, Charlie, have we done an example for South River paddle on your itineraries? I feel like I might have.
Right here. So Wrexham
Okay.
up to CVS.
Wrexham. Mhm.
So it's Wrexham and upstream from there.
Yep.
And I think there's one for the reverse.
Yep.
So from CVS back to Wrexham, but not
Great.
Wrexham to the mouth.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, I think that actually that's a whole nother hidden gem right there. Now, put the canoe launch in up behind CVS, you'd be surprised at what's behind Route 139. It's just a beautiful river and, you know, lovely place to put in and go for a paddle downstream. Again, you might need to stage a car unless you can time the tide. So you're going in and out on the same, you know, going around the turn of the tide. So, you know, obviously that's part of the plan. Do I want to keep my car at one location and just go out and back? If I'm going to go out and back, I need to go before the tide changes and come back in with the tide changing. So in the South River, you would go at low tide on an outgoing tide and turn around as it starts to come back in. If you do it from Wrexham, you would do it on an incoming tide going upriver and turn around on an outgoing and come back
So
to your car.
So Sam, if people knew the Boston tide times and refer to that chart that we had up earlier,
Yep.
all this they have to do really is determine the local tide time using the differences here. So for
Mhm.
example, at 12 o'clock Boston high tide, 12 o'clock at the Spit, and at Wrexham Beach, high tide, local high tide at Wrexham would be at 1 o'clock. So This is a good chart to follow.
And all
Yeah.
of the slides are available on our website under the Timing the Tides download.
Yep. So that's great. It's been a while since I've seen these tide slides that you've made, Charlie, and they're wonderful, really clear. So hopefully everybody feels a little bit more comfortable with navigating our rivers and the tides. And I can't thank Charlie and Lori enough for helping to make sure that that's clear. And we'll probably do more of these because I think there's a need for it. And then one more push, become a member and do our Great River Race. We really need your support, particularly this year, to continue to be the voice for the rivers and for our coastal waters. So thank you for coming all. And we'll see you on the rivers and hopefully at the race meeting on the 30th. Thanks. I think we're all set.